Hey guys, doing a little review here of my 2015 Accord. I just crossed over 50,000 miles a couple days ago and just figured I'd talk about the car a little bit more. It's been a good car for a number of years now. I've had it for about 4 years and 50,000 miles, so a decent amount of use on it so far. There's a couple guys on motorcycles back there. They were doing a big trip today. It's supposed to be pretty nice today, although it's a little cloudy right now. But the guy had a Kawasaki Concours. I was talking to him, and he has 92,000 miles on that bike. Probably looks to be like 10 or 12 years old, but that's a lot of miles. He says he bought it 3 years ago with 25,000 miles, so he's put quite a bit of miles on that bike in 3 years. Like close to 25,000 miles a year on the Kawasaki Concours. But anyway, yeah, this, I've made a couple different videos talking about this car. Again, I bought it with a rebuild title, so I think I paid, well beneath the market value for the car at the time. I've had it for about 4 years. Haven't really had to do any maintenance, like I said, just oil changes, and there was a couple sensor type things like a little bit after I bought it, but I had to take it to Honda for them to do it. I guess they adjusted the valves or something, but everything was, and they fixed I don't know what sensors it was, but it was like $1,000. I think it was maybe $1,000 or $1,500 is what I had to pay Honda to. I think it was like the Ford collision warning system thing kept coming on, but what they charged me for was, they said the car needed an alignment, which who knows, maybe it did, maybe it didn't. And then they said they adjusted the valves because they were out of spec, I guess, which I don't, the car only had 20,000 miles, but it did have a rebuilt title, so that's fine. The car's totally reliable, but when you have a light come on the dashboard, if you have a new car, you obviously want to get that addressed. And if you take it to Honda, you're probably not going to walk out of Honda for less than $500 or any car dealership really, if you don't have a warranty. So no big deal. I got a little upset that they were charging me. Like, I kept asking them, I'm like, okay, well, what's the problem with the car? You guys have all the scan tools and everything, and you guys work on Hondas all day long. What's the problem with the car? Like, what needs to be done? And that was the biggest thing. They couldn't really tell me. They were like, well, we don't know, we're gonna keep looking at it, and we're gonna do a valve adjustment, I guess, but we don't know if that's really the problem. And I'm like, this is a pretty new car. It was 2 years old at the time, and I understand it's not on warranty, but you would think the Honda dealership would be able to figure out, here's the problem and here's what we're gonna do to fix it, right? But I went in there like 3 different times, and they had to give me a rental car like each time because the lights kept coming back on. And I was like, hey guys, I don't want to have to keep coming in here and paying for, every time I come in here it's like $400 to $600, and you're not really telling me that you're fixing the problem. So that got a little frustrating. Again, one time I think it was $200. The valve adjustment was like $379. The alignment was like $125. And then, they had they brought it in again and charged me another like $500 or $600. So, those costs can add up, but all in all, that's what you're buying when you buy a newer car. It's like, I took a little bit of a risk buying like a rebuilt title car, but if with any car, if you take it to a dealership, they're gonna charge you, that's why you don't want to have a really cheap car, because if you have a really cheap car, the moment you take it to a dealership, you're underwater. The car's only maybe worth $2,000. You go to a dealership, or you go to just a average mechanic shop, they're gonna charge you, $500 probably, for anything, unless you go in there and say, hey, I need an alignment, and you already know what the deal is, then maybe you can get out for a couple $100. But if you go in there and you say something's wrong and I need you to look at it, like, they might be able to fix your problem, but they're gonna suggest a whole bunch of other stuff that most people are like, oh, okay, whatever, just do it, because they don't really know. So I think it's best to find like a good mechanic, if you have a not such a new car, but also, what you can do to defend against having to go to the repair shop all the time is just kind of buy a newer car, or one that kind of looks newer and hasn't been used that much. So that's what I did. You know, I got a 2-year-old car for like less than $14,000. A Honda Accord. It's only a few years old, and you know, I don't plan on selling. It's hard to sell a rebuilt title car, right? If you try to sell, and I knew that, because when you're buying it, there's always a story. It's like, hey, you know, this car was in an accident and it was repaired. Like, that's just a story that a lot of people don't want to hear. But if you plan on buying the car and using the car and having it as like your main car, like I think I put about 10,000 miles a year on this car, roughly. Like, I think last year maybe I put 7,500, and then like this year it was like around 10,000. But so I'm not driving the car a lot, but I don't really want to have to deal with a car with really high miles, just because you always want to have a reliable, you know, transportation wherever you're going. And you can have maybe a second car if you want to have fun or something, but you want to have a reliable vehicle so that you don't have to worry about getting somewhere, you know, reliably and safely and on time. So that's why I wanted to get kind of a newer car, but I didn't want to pay the new car. Like, I didn't want to go in there and pay 25 or 30,000 for a new car. You know, I would have rather gotten one that was, I didn't need a brand new car. I just wanted one that was a few years old. And so I looked for a while, and this kind of checked all the boxes. It's 4 doors, you know, leather seats. Obviously it's a Honda, so it's very reliable. It's kind of an, you know, I'd say it's like a luxury, it's an upper end economy car. It's not like a Honda Civic. It's much nicer than that. It's a lot more roomier, but it doesn't have anything incredibly fancy. I mean, it has seat warmers and satellite radio, but it doesn't have GPS. But it's a very reliable car. You know, it's no wonder they sell a lot of these things. So yeah, 50,000 miles on it. I think it'll go, I think it'll last a long time. You know, I probably won't need to really even think about getting a car for at least the next 10 years, or even have to deal with any maintenance. You know, even if I foresee driving much more than I do now, you know, in 10 years, I probably only put 150,000 miles on this vehicle. So, you know, that'll still be at 200,000 miles. And I researched that the average Honda makes it, and this was, I think it was maybe Scotty Kilmer's video, I don't know, but it was like 209,000 miles is the average lifespan of a Honda. And a lot of them make it a lot longer than that, but some of them, you know, they get in wrecks, or the cost of fixing, maybe the transmission goes out or something, and you know, it's taken off the road for that because the cost of replacement is just too high. So that's another thing. Like, you want kind of easy miles, you want carefree miles. Once you start getting into like 200,000 miles, if things start breaking, you know, if you have to replace suspension components, or like different things like that, if some of the electronics start going out and you're just spending $500 here, you know, $1,000 there, then you start asking yourself, you're like, well, this car has 200-something thousand miles, it's maybe worth $2,000, $3,000. You know, do I want to spend another $3,000 on this car when in reality the car's still going to only be worth $2,000 or $3,000? Most people would say no, but you know, there's lots of cars out there that are 20 years old that have 200,000-300,000 miles on them, and they run totally fine. So I went and looked at I saw a Maxima, like, because that was the first car that I drove. Actually, my dad had a Nissan Maxima. It was a 97 Nissan Maxima, and I saw one of them on, I probably should have bought the car, honestly, but it's kind of a long story. But there was a 5-speed manual Nissan Maxima. It was like a 1996, I think. And the guy was only asking like $1,500 for it. And you know, it had 175,000 miles, and it was pretty clean for what it was, and it was a manual, but so I thought that would be fun to have a stick car, but, and because it was a Maxima, and it was pretty clean actually. I probably should have bought it. I offered the guy like $1,200 and he didn't take it. The funny thing is that the guy had another, if anyone has ever bought or sold like used vehicles or used Craigslist or OfferUp or like Facebook, you know how flaky people can be, and you know, it's people will tell you like, oh, I'm interested, I want to come buy it, and then you'll just never hear from them again, or they won't show up, or they'll tell you they want to come look at it and then they ghost you. So it's very rare to get someone that actually is going to show up with money in hand, you know, unless it's like a $10 item. You know, if you're talking anything over like 500 bucks, it's pretty hard to get someone to buy it unless you're heavily discounting your price. So this guy had been trying to sell the vehicle for like almost a year. It was on OfferUp for like 9 months or something like that. And so I thought to myself, I'm like, geez, you know, Jesus, this guy hasn't been able to sell the car. You know, maybe no one's been interested, or maybe a few people came and looked at it and there was a problem with it. I don't know. So I was like, you know, I talked to them over text because they didn't give me their phone number or anything, and I arranged a time to go see it. And so the guy literally had another guy there in a different parking lot just waiting to buy the car. And I was like, okay, you know, that's, first of all, that's hard to believe that you have an appointment with me and then there's just another guy waiting to maybe buy the car. Because if I bought the car, then the guy would have driven there and he would have sold the car, so he wouldn't have had the car, obviously. So I was like, hey, geez, you know, I don't really want to pay more than $1,200 for this car because that's where I'm comfortable with it. And you're saying you have another guy in the other parking lot that wants to buy the car? Okay, go ahead and try to sell it. And I said, if you don't sell the car to him, I'll pay $1,200, but I don't really want to pay more than that. Because in reality, I you know, I probably should have bought the car. I think he said he would have taken like $1,350, so really I should have just paid that. But I just, for whatever reason, I was like, dude, if you have another guy that's been waiting there across the street and wants to buy this car, then dude, go ahead. I'm gonna call your bluff on that, because that's, I've dealt with a lot of transactions with people like online, and like with, I mean, people can be really flaky. There's no punishment for being really flaky, you know. So, you know, the guy went over to the other parking lot, sure enough there was a guy there, and then, you know, like 20 minutes later he texted me that he sold it, and I was like, well, that's kind of amazing that you sold that car, because I would have thought for sure that, oh, the other guy didn't come, he wasn't there, he's running late, he doesn't have money, he's not interested, because that's usually what happens. You know, even people that show up most of the time aren't serious. But so I was kind of, it was probably a good thing that I didn't get the car. Like, I definitely don't need two cars. It was just kind of a cheap car, but that would have been fun to drive because it's a 5-speed. But really, the cost of having another car, you know, obviously you have to have car insurance, and you have to register the car, and you have to pay the taxes on the car. And so, you know, it's just another expense that you don't really need. Plus, it's like I already have a couple motorcycles. I have a couple cheap motorcycles that I really don't, like, I would put such low miles on that car anyway. Like, I only put, like I told you, I only put 10,000 miles a year on my actual car, sometimes even less. So it would just be kind of a unneeded vehicle, really. But yeah, so that was, you know, and part of the reason I offered $1,200, because the car was clean and it was probably worth $1,500, honestly. But it had a check engine light on, and you know, who knows, it could be something really basic. But you know, we had a Maxima, that's what I said, and I sold the car with like the same amount of miles. We had a Nissan Maxima that was a 97, that had 100, and it had roughly the same miles on it, like literally almost the same, 175 I think, or maybe 180. But the car was still running fine, but it had, you know, it started acting a little weird at times. Like sometimes it wouldn't start, or it would kind of start hard, or, you know, certain things wouldn't work. So, you know, we ended up selling that car for like $2,500, I think. But that was like 8 years ago, so the car was 8 years newer back then, obviously. So that's, you know, there's some good deals out there, but when you're buying a used car, that's always the problem. It's like, you know, the car is not going to be worth anything more than what you pay for it. The moment you start putting money into an old car, it's not worth anything. So that's kind of the reason. It's like, hey, if I'm gonna buy an older car, I want to buy one that's pretty clean and it doesn't look like it needs work. Because if you have to replace the clutch, if you have to replace the transmission, if you have to replace certain suspension components, or like a timing belt or a timing chain or fans, or, you know, anything, or water pump, things like that, the money really starts adding up, right? And before you know it, you have $5,000 in a car that's, you know, you can sell for $1,500, right? So that's kind of the thing, where it's like, hey, if I pay $10,000 to $15,000 for a car that's pretty new and that's reliable, and I plan on having the car for 15 years minimum, maybe longer, then really my cost of ownership is pretty low, and I'm not going to have to deal with the maintenance curve, and I'm going to be able to get a lot of like worry-free miles out of the vehicle, right? And so that was kind of my whole plan. It was like, you know, I think it's cool to have an older car that is kind of has some character and is more fun to drive, and maybe is a manual transmission. But if you really just want a reliable vehicle, like, that's probably the best way to go. It's like, hey, get a car that's a couple years old. Maybe look for one with a rebuilt title if you're open to that, because you can get a really good discount on it. And if you plan on having the car for 10 plus years, then, you know, that can be a good use of, it can be the best use of your money, I think, for a vehicle. Obviously, all cars are depreciating assets, but I think if you can buy a very reliable car with low miles, that's only a few years old, that maybe has a rebuilt title, you can get a really good car that is going to last you a long time, and you're not going to have to worry about everything breaking all the time. And so that's what I did. And I think this car, you know, I don't really think there's anything I have to do. You know, I've been looking to just certain maintenance items. I don't really know how long my tires are going to be good for. You know, these tires are original, so they've gone 50,000 miles, but other than that, I think it's like I have to maybe do the transmission fluid. I think it said like every 60,000 miles roughly is when you want to change it, but some people say that you're never supposed to change it. So I'll probably change it at 60,000 miles, and I probably don't have to do really any other maintenance until like 100, and I probably don't have to do any maintenance then either. But I think you want to replace like bigger engine components at that, like maybe a timing chain or whatever, for at 100,000, just as kind of preventative maintenance. So all that being said, it sounds to me like the first thing to kind of go in any car that's modern nowadays is like the automatic transmission. That seems to be kind of the weakest link. So I don't drive this car hard, you know, the RPMs are pretty low. Sometimes I put it into sport mode, like very rarely, just to kind of give it a different driving mode, and let the transmission, you know, rev up a little, or let the engine rev up a little bit higher, and work out the transmission. But I don't drive the car crazy, you know, I'm going like 60 or 65 in the right lane most of the time, sometimes 70, but usually not. So I think the car should last a long time, because I really don't stress it out that much, but I still, you know, try to make sure it's, you know, at least healthy, right? By sometimes going into sport mode and that sort of thing. So, and I let it warm up usually too. Like I let my car warm up probably for like at least 2 minutes every time I start it, just so that it, you know, has some time to, before you just slam it into gear. So we'll see. I think this, I mean, I really don't foresee having to get another car for a long time, and that's really the thing. It's like, you see a lot of people that have a lot of vehicles that are kind of all junk. It's like, well, maybe each one of them has a different purpose, but in reality, it's like, you know, if you can have one vehicle that's reliable, doesn't take up a bunch of space, obviously, it's going to be a pretty low cost of ownership. You're not having to pay insurance on multiple vehicles. You're not having to pay tabs on multiple vehicles. It can be a pretty good deal. So that's kind of, I know I was kind of rambling there about a bunch of random stuff, because it's kind of hard talking to yourself, but there you go. That's kind of my video overview of what's kind of happened, and 50,000 on this now. Of course, I only bought it with like 18,000, so I haven't put 50,000 miles on it. I've actually put just about the same amount of miles on my motorcycle, on my one motorcycle, as I have on this car, about 33,000 miles. So I put about 33 on my little Yamaha, and I put about 33 on this. So they last a long time. Like I said, I mean, I was just talking to a guy that had a Kawasaki Concours with 92,000 miles on it. So if you use them, I think the best thing for, I mean, motorcycles definitely, but it's just that they're constantly used, and that you do basic maintenance. I mean, you have to do the basic maintenance, especially on motorcycles. The problem you run into with anything is if it just sits for so long, certain things start to break down, and you know, then you start having to, you know, your brake lines fail, or certain things get rusted out. And the best thing for any machine is just to kind of constantly be used, especially nowadays, because they're not made with the same like mechanical quality. A lot more things now are electronic, so as soon as like certain electronic systems fail on a modern car, it's very hard to fix them, or very expensive, because it's not simple, right? You can't just take it to like this Mercedes behind me. It looks like a Mercedes, one of those box wagons. It's like probably $100,000 or close to it. Like, if something happened on that car, you can just imagine how much it's going to cost you to go into the dealership. They're going to be charging you probably thousands of dollars just to look at it. You know, maybe there's a warranty on that, but everything in that car is probably electronic, and a lot of stuff in this car is too. Like, most of the stuff is totally computer controlled, and so you know, if you have a problem with something, it could be very expensive to fix it, because it's not just a simple mechanical part that you could go buy at AutoZone, right? So anyways, that's, guys, I know I'm rambling on it. I'll end the video here. It's kind of a long one, just talking about cars and kind of the maintenance curve and everything like that. But you know, if you're in the market for a car, you know, if you want to get a good value, look into doing what I did. Look for a car that's a couple years old, has a little bit of miles, maybe was in a rebuilt title deal, but you always have to research those and just make sure that it's a legitimate thing. Like this one got in an accident, and you know, the passenger door had to be replaced. So at the time they totaled out the vehicle, and some guy bought it and did a you know, professional repair job on it. So you have to do your research. Obviously, if it was in like an engine, if the engine has been replaced, or you know, something happened structurally with the car that was serious, you probably don't want to get involved in that, because you could have some pretty significant issues down the line. But if you do your research, you can get a good deal. And if you plan on using the car for a long time and not selling it in a couple of years, then it can be a really good decision for you. So I'll end it there. Again, if you guys like that or have any thoughts on it, feel free to comment, and